Hello, my name is Mark Lawrence, and I'm the director of the Lyndon Johnson Library and Museum here in Austin, Texas. This year, 2021, is a very special time for the LBJ Library, the 50th anniversary of the library's dedication and grand opening back in 1971. This landmark moment is, of course, a time to look forward, to think about how the library and museum can tell the story of the Johnson era in a way that engages new generations, how we can use our public programming to reach wider audiences and promote energetic discussion of the major issues of our time, and how we can better serve researchers delving into the history of LBJ's life and presidency. It's my honor to lead the institution into its second half century, and I'm excited about all that lies ahead. But 2021 is also a time to look backward at all that this institution has accomplished over the past 50 years. The library's origins lie in the middle years of the LBJ presidency, when Lyndon, and especially his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, began planning for this institution. At that time, there were only 4 presidential libraries administered by the federal government, but the Johnsons knew they wanted to establish one here on the University of Texas campus on a scale and with a broad mission that would exceed anything that had come before. The result was this remarkable 10-story edifice with its distinctive white travertine exterior that's towered over the landscape ever since. Even more than the grandness of the building itself, though, I'm proud of what's happened under this roof. The events, public programming, exhibits, research projects, and much more that have drawn literally millions of people across our threshold. We've celebrated the triumphs of the Johnson presidency and studied its flaws. We've delved into the problems of our own times and also had a few laughs. This video captures what I think are 10 of the most memorable moments of triumph, sadness, seriousness, and good cheer in that rich history. Choosing these moments was not easy. There are simply too many possibilities. But I hope this program will highlight at least some of the striking ways in which the LBJ Library has served the public and made a difference in the lives of countless people. Please enjoy this journey across the last half century. No date stands out more in the history of the LBJ Library than May 22nd, 1971. That's when dignitaries from across the nation gathered on the lawn outside for dedication ceremonies that officially opened the brand new building to the public. Design of the building, led by renowned architect Gordon Bunshaft, had been completed in 1966, and construction started the following year on the northeast corner of the campus of the University of Texas at Austin. By the spring of 1971, a little more than 2 years after Lyndon Johnson had left the White House, the building was ready. At the center of the dedication were, of course, LBJ himself, Mrs. Johnson, and their family. They were joined by leaders of the University of Texas, who saw the library as a major resource for the intellectual life of the campus. And they were joined by leading politicians and policymakers from the Johnson years, including former Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Republican Senator Barry Goldwater, who had been LBJ's opponent in the 1964 presidential race. But it was the presence of LBJ's successor, President Richard Nixon, that best indicated the importance of the event for the life of the nation.
The heart of America today, at this moment, is in the heart of Texas, as this distinguished company so well illustrates. It is here to pay tribute to the life of a man and the life of his wife as well, who has given 40 years of service to this state and to this nation. The entire nation is indebted to you, President Johnson.
President Johnson established a new standard for presidential libraries, not only with the size of his collection, about 31 million pages of documents from across his life, but also with his vow that the institution would reckon honestly and openly with American history during the turbulent years when he had held office.
We're all partners in this hopeful undertaking. The people of Texas have built this library. The National Archives will manage this library. There is no record of a mistake or an unpleasantness or criticism that is not included in the files here. I do not know how this period will later be regarded in the years to come, but that's really not the point. This library will show the facts, not just the joy and the triumphs, but the sorrows and the failures too.
One of the people on the stage with LBJ on that day in 1971 was Ben Barnes, a political protege of Lyndon Johnson's who served as the lieutenant governor of Texas during those years. What do you remember best about that day?
I remember it was a warm day in May. President Johnson was nervous. He was almost like an expectant father in a waiting room of the hospital. I think he was worried about what reaction that Nixon was going to have to the library, whether there was going to be a big crowd, whether the crowd was going to be enthusiastic. The Vietnam War was still going on, and we had demonstrations on the campus during the war. I think he was worried about maybe an incident taking place. But it was a great day, and his coloring was good that day. It was already showing on Johnson's physical appearance that he was not a well man. But that day he had rosy cheeks and a smile, and a nervous smile, but yet a very broad smile.
So much that has ensued at the library over the past 5 decades flowed from the tone that LBJ set on that day. The commitment to openness, the dedication to debate on the big issues of public concern, and the enthusiasm for education and discovery. The LBJ Library is still inspired by those same goals that LBJ laid out half a century ago. The LBJ Library has never shied away from the most urgent and even most controversial issues of the day. That was abundantly clear just 18 months after the library's dedication. In December 1972, the library convened a momentous 2-day symposium to take stock of the Johnson administration's achievement in the arena of civil rights, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and to consider the path forward for a nation still struggling with segregation and injustice. Over 2 days, some of the great civil rights leaders of the post-1945 era were there, including Vernon Jordan, Barbara Jordan, Roy Wilkins, Henry B. Gonzalez, Clarence Mitchell, and Julian Bond.
On the positive side, we are no longer slaves. Next, we can sit at lunch counters, sit downstairs in movie theaters, ride in the front of buses, register, vote, work, and go to school where we once could not. But in a great many ways, we are constantly discovering that things have either not changed at all, or in some ways have managed to become much worse.
But one of the high points of the event came when Lyndon Johnson, despite mounting health problems, took the stage and delivered a heartfelt 30-minute speech that acknowledged the distance the nation still had to travel to assure full citizenship and opportunity for all.
We know there's injustice. We know there's intolerance. We know there's discrimination and hate and suspicion. And we know there's division among us. But there is a larger truth. We have proved that great progress is possible. We know how much still remains to be done. And if our efforts continue, and if our will is strong, and if our hearts are right, and if courage remains our constant companion, then, my fellow Americans, I am confident we shall overcome.
One of the members of the audience that day was LBJ's younger daughter, Lucy Baines Johnson. Lucy, can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances surrounding your father's participation in the Civil Rights Summit of 1972?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be there. I had just gotten out of the hospital myself and been told that I probably ought not to go to the symposium, but I couldn't bear not to do so. And when I saw that my father was meaningfully delayed and ambled onto the stage looking like a very old and ill man, and he was just in his 60s, I had a lump in my throat that sort of took over all of the emotions that I had about the day. After the event was over and after he had spoken, I rushed to get to his side and I said, "Daddy, then why did you do that?" And he looked at me and smiled and said, "Oh, Lucy Baines, that's easy. If I had died, I would have gone dying for what I lived for."
The event grew heated at times as disagreements over the priorities and pace of the civil rights struggle came to the fore. At one particularly heated moment, LBJ walked up to the stage and put his arms around the shoulders of Clarence Mitchell and Roy Innis, two civil rights leaders with different outlooks. As President Johnson had done so often through his political career, he settled the argument, at least for the moment, through his legendary skills of persuasion. The struggle for equal rights and opportunity continues in the 21st century. But for a brief moment in 1972, LBJ and the others gathered in Austin highlighted the bold steps that the nation had recently taken in the value of reasoned debate. The LBJ Library's dedication to serious debate of controversial questions was never so evident as in 1991, when 22 policymakers from the Johnson presidency came together to talk about the administration's decisions with respect to the war in Vietnam. This was no superficial chat about old times. Instead, it was a really incisive discussion, with questions posed by three of the most eminent historians of the war who had conducted deep research in the LBJ archive. The gathering included no less than former National Security Advisor Walt Rostow, CIA Director Richard Helms, and General William Westmoreland, who had commanded U.S. forces in Vietnam in the years when LBJ had dramatically escalated the American commitment to the war. Over the years to come, the library would host additional events focused on the Vietnam War that pulled together academic specialists as well as participants in the momentous decisions of the 1960s. In 2016, in fact, the library built on the foundation laid down in 1991 by hosting a Vietnam War Summit. 3 days of lectures, discussions, performances, and other events that brought together policymakers like former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, renowned filmmaker Ken Burns, and anti-war activist Tom Hayden. Perhaps most impressive of all, the event drew hundreds of Vietnam veterans, many of whom took part in veterans recognition ceremonies and took time to visit the half-scale replica of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial that graces the National Mall in Washington, D.C. For a full week, the replica was set up on the outdoor plaza just east of the library. Here's a look back at that memorable time.
It's a nightmare that I just can't get rid of. Because I was supposed to die. In the first place, I was supposed to die. And then when I picked up the pieces of these guys, it's been haunting me for 45 years.
When LBJ opened his library in 1971, he expressed hope that it would enable visitors to see the history of his presidency with the bark off. With our events focused on the Vietnam War, we've tried hard to live up to those words. In May of 1991, the LBJ Library made headlines when it hosted the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and their royal entourage during the Queen's only visit to Texas during her long reign. Earlier in the day, a crowd of about 8,000 had greeted the Queen at the state capitol, where she gave brief remarks and accepted a gift of 8 pairs of cowboy boots for her grandchildren. She then made her way to the LBJ Library, where she was joined by Lady Bird Johnson, other members of the Johnson family, Governor Ann Richards, and other dignitaries. All in all, one of the most striking moments in the library's history. It's a history full of visits by VIPs from virtually every walk of public life. Hundreds of times across the last half-century, leaders in politics, international affairs, the arts, sciences, literature, activism, and so much more have spoken from our podiums and engaged countless people gathered in our auditoriums and other public spaces. Our visitors from abroad also included Mikhail Gorbachev, who reflected on his years as leader of the Soviet Union during a visit to the library in 2011. Perhaps the high point of that event came when Mark Updegrove, then the director of the LBJ Library, asked Mr. Gorbachev about how history would view him.
History is a fickle lady. But I'm proud of the life that I've lived. And let history decide.
As for American visitors, it's hard to top all the presidents who've spoken from our stage. Every president since LBJ, in fact, other than Donald Trump.
He believed that together we can build an America that is more fair, more equal, and more free than the one we inherited.
Other visitors include Supreme Court Justices Earl Warren, Sandra Day O'Connor, and Neil Gorsuch, journalists Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, Bob Woodward, and Carl Bernstein. And we've had countless political activists, including, just in recent years, Gloria Steinem, Tom Hayden, Vernon Jordan, Andrew Young, and the legendary civil rights activist Dolores Huerta.
Sí se puede. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Our astronauts have included John Glenn, and in 2009, the whole crew of Apollo 8, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, on the 50th anniversary of their historic mission to orbit around the moon. And we've had athletes and entertainers such as Hank Aaron, Bill Russell, Bill Bradley, Mary Wilson, and Country Joe McDonald. In the last years of his life, Lyndon Johnson expressed hope that the LBJ Library would be a stage for the best thinkers and doers in American life. It's a goal that we've been pursuing ever since. Undoubtedly, one of the most remarkable moments in the history of the LBJ Library came on August 27, 2008, Lyndon Johnson's 100th birthday. Plans for that day were appropriately ambitious to remember a man who exuded so much energy and was so often the life of the party. The library used the occasion to open a brand new museum exhibit called To the Moon, the American space program in the 1960s.
UT campus today, a 90-ton crane lifting 2 spacecraft into place inside the LBJ Library. You just don't see that every day.
We hosted dignitaries, including the Johnson family, leaders of the University of Texas, and several former directors of the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We were even joined by the astronauts aboard the International Space Station.
It's our hope that everyone who visits your museum will understand how far we've come since those early days of the American and Soviet space race. As we stand on the brink of a new era of exploration and a return to the moon, the legacy of Lyndon B. Johnson, his vision of reaching new worlds, and his commitment to the peaceful use of outer space will continue to impact exploration for decades to come.
Back on Earth, we promised to put on a Texas-sized barbecue open to the community under a tent outside the library building. What we didn't anticipate was just how spectacular of an event it turned out to be. Betty Sue Flowers was the director of the LBJ Library at that time. Betty Sue, what do you remember most from that birthday celebration?
I just remember the high spirits, the dancing, the music, the amazing crowds that had old folks from the country to students. As it got dark, the tower lit up orange. It was a lovely time. Students came from the LBJ school, the extended Johnson family. It was just a bash. And it reminds me of how much LBJ and Mrs. Johnson were in the hearts of people.
I think it's wonderful that, everything that he worked for and has done carries on today. And this is sort of just a remembrance for him and everything he's done.
My father could receive no greater birthday present.
All in all, it was a birthday bash befitting a man who loved nothing more than a crowd of his fellow Texans. An undisputed high point of the LBJ presidency was the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the most transformative of the major bills that President Johnson signed. It was fitting then that a memorable moment in the history of the LBJ Library came on the 50th anniversary of that accomplishment when we hosted the Civil Rights Summit. The summit was an incredible 3-day event of speeches, panel discussions, and performances to celebrate the 1964 bill, to take stock of civil rights progress over the last 5 decades, and to discuss race relations in the years to come. The lineup of speakers was truly remarkable. Giants of the civil rights movement like John Lewis, Julian Bond, Andrew Young, and Mavis Staples graced us with their presence. John Lewis's comments captured the tone of the whole event.
The philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence tend to tell us that you should not get lost in a sea of despair, that you should be hopeful. You have to pick yourself up and continue to move.
In a remarkable display of LBJ's enduring ability to speak across generations and to bring people together behind a common cause, we also had 4 presidents representing both political parties on our stage during those days. Our guests were Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush, as well as Barack Obama, then in his 6th year in office.
The story of America is a story of progress. And that's true because of men like President Lyndon Baines Johnson. In so many ways, he embodied America with all our gifts and all our flaws. This man, weaned in a world full of racial hatred, somehow found within himself the ability to connect his experience with the brown child in a small Texas town. As powerful as he became in that Oval Office, he understood them. He understood what it meant to be on the outside. And he believed that their plight was his plight too.
Lyndon Johnson's achievements in civil rights, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, deserve celebration every day. But for a short time in 2014, they commanded center stage in a truly memorable way. No individual has been more important to the life of the LBJ Library than Lady Bird Johnson, the First Lady of the United States from 1963 to 1969. And no moment better captures the warmth with which she presided over this institution than her 80th birthday party back in December 1992. Mrs. Johnson hailed from the small town of Karnak, Texas, and she was reputed to have been an exceptionally shy young woman. But she went on to a remarkable partnership in all senses of the word with her husband, Lyndon. She traveled the world, counseled her husband at innumerable moments of decision, and advanced her own policy priorities, including environmental protection and early childhood education, with a steely determination belied by her exceptional gentility. The 80th birthday party was, by all accounts, a remarkable event. Many of her old college friends, even a college roommate, were there to toast Mrs. Johnson. Every living president sent his regards, and admirers presented her with a huge 4-foot by 6-foot birthday cake, decorated with the wildflowers for which Mrs. Johnson was so well known. Mrs. Johnson certainly deserved all this recognition, both for the role she played in the LBJ presidency and for the influence she wielded at the LBJ Library over so many years. She was literally there at the beginning, leading efforts in the 1960s to plan the library and oversee its design and construction. She worked alongside Lyndon during the final years of his life before he passed away in January 1973. And she was a constant presence at library events across the years that followed. She played a leading role in guiding the library's course. She hosted events with her well-known grace and charm, and she made everyone feel welcome. Lucy Baines Johnson is the younger daughter of Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson. Lucy, what did the LBJ Library mean to your mother?
Well, Mother was madly in love with Lyndon Johnson from the day she married him until the day he died. And the library became her mission after his death. To tell the story of Lyndon Johnson with the bark off was not something Mother feared. And so she tried with the remaining third of her life after his death to make sure she did all the considerable good that she could to tell the story of Lyndon Johnson and his love affair with this country.
It was only fitting that when Mrs. Johnson passed away in 2007, she would lie in repose in the library's Great Hall. Hundreds of people lined up to pay their respects, just as they had done for Lyndon Johnson when he lay in state at the library following his death 34 years earlier in 1973. And Mrs. Johnson's immense popularity was also on display as her casket was transported to the LBJ Ranch west of Austin. Thousands of local people lined the roadways to catch a glimpse of history and honor a woman who had done so much for Austin, for Texas, for the nation, and for the world. On December 4th, 2008, the library achieved a milestone that had been 15 years in the making. The library's archival staff released to the public a final collection of tape recordings capturing President Johnson's telephone conversations during his time in office. These recordings, made by LBJ across his 5 years as president, are a truly stunning collection of historical sources, almost 850 hours of tape that provide unique access to LBJ's decision-making, his personal style, and his personality. Thanks to the tapes, we can, for example, listen in on LBJ speaking with Martin Luther King just a few days after Johnson became president.
Well, I'm going to support them all, and you can count on that, and I'm going to do my best to get other men to do likewise, and I'll have to have y'all's help. I never needed more than I do now.
Well, you know you have it, and just feel free to call on us for anything.
Thank you so much, Martin.
All right.
Call me when you... I sure will. Call me when you're down here next time.
I certainly will.
We can also hear LBJ anguishing about the war in Vietnam, as in this revealing conversation from May 1964 with his National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy.
I'll tell you, the more I just stayed awake last night thinking about this thing, the more I think of it, I don't know what in the hell. We look like me, we're getting into another Korea. It just worries the hell out of me. I don't see what we can ever hope to get out of there with once we're committed.
Historians now know that 6 presidents, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, made recordings of their meetings and conversations during their time in the White House. But LBJ was the only one to make recordings stretching across his entire presidency. And the LBJ recordings surely rank among the very most revealing. One person who's carefully worked through the recordings is Melody Barnes. In 2020, Melody helped make an award-winning podcast called LBJ and the Great Society. Melody, what do the recordings reveal about LBJ that we might not otherwise know?
I found when working with the recordings and sharing them with audiences that they are a treasure trove and a particularly poignant and powerful way to communicate about LBJ using his own voice, letting President Johnson reveal himself to audiences in a way that the written word just doesn't quite do. So it gives us a 360-degree view of Lyndon Johnson as a strategic master and what he was really feeling as he was launching and driving the Great Society.
Gradual release of the recordings between 1993 and 2008 reflects the extraordinary dedication and skill of the LBJ Library's archivists, who found the right technology to process this material, cataloged it, and made it available to the public. The recordings are now a valuable asset for anyone trying to gain a deeper appreciation of the Johnson presidency or the 1960s more generally. In the late 1950s, a new musical sound was growing louder on the American cultural scene. It was Motown, a blend of gospel, blues, and pop, pioneered by African-American artists based in Detroit. Before long, Motown had grown into one of the most significant cultural departures of the 1960s, an innovation that served as a soundtrack of sorts for the civil rights movement and continues to influence music to this day. In 2019, one of the LBJ Library's most memorable moments came when we cut the ribbon on a spectacular temporary exhibit, delving into this remarkable era in the history of American music. Curated by the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, the exhibit enabled visitors to learn about the history of Motown Records, the famous label established in 1959, and appreciate the political importance of this new sound. Visitors could also check out musical instruments, wardrobe, and other artifacts touching on the lives and careers of artists like the Supremes, the Four Tops, the Temptations, Stevie Wonder, and the Jackson 5. And the library was proud to welcome members of these acts to share their memories with packed audiences in our auditorium and tour the exhibit. Here's Mary Wilson, one of the Supremes, taking a look at the displays. And here's Mary from the same event, reflecting on the early years of Motown and what it represented to a black teen in Detroit.
You know, today everyone wants to get into the business because they want to be stars, and everybody thinks that they're stars, right? Back then, we were like black kids. We just wanted to sing.
And here's Four Tops member Duke Fakir looking back on what Motown represented to the civil rights movement.
It was a small part of the civil rights movement. Yeah. At that time, whites started buying our records. What that had never bought black records before. You know, while Martin King was slowly marching down the street, our music was seeping out of their houses, out of the kitchens, out of their basements.
The Motown exhibit is a good example of our eagerness at the LBJ Library, not only to explore Lyndon Johnson's presidency, which we cover in our permanent galleries, but also to use our temporary shows to call attention to the whole historical era in which LBJ lived. Over the years, we've delved into music, sports, women's history, space exploration, and many other themes. And we'll no doubt keep exploring these kinds of subjects in the future as we bring history alive for future generations of visitors. In October 2014, the LBJ Library did something unusual in its 50-year history. It staged a play, and it had a special audience in mind, kids ranging from 4th grade to high school. The show was called Liberty, Equality, and Fireworks by playwright Gregory S. Perrin. It was commissioned and produced by a local Austin children's performing arts group called the Pollyanna Theater Company. Here's a quick look.
The only way for us to get our rights is through nonviolence.
Nonviolence?
Yes. You can't win a fight with both your hands tied behind your back. So nonviolence is the only way for us to get our rights without even throwing a punch.
The play, focusing on the struggle for civil rights in the US in the middle of the 1960s, is set in a history museum. The action exposes young audiences to key aspects of the civil rights movement, as well as the Voting Rights Act. Iconic images and photos literally come to life before everyone's eyes. Amanda Melanson is the director of the education department here at the LBJ Library. Amanda, how did audiences respond to the show?
The passion for equity and anti-racist work is really clear in students as they walk out of the play. The concepts in the play are so hard to teach in a classroom, and by students being able to see their peers from 60 years ago live through the civil rights movement, students are able to put themselves in those shoes and walk away asking a lot of questions and wanting to know more. It's a long-lasting reach that I think will just continue for the next 50 years of the library's history.
Every year, we welcome thousands of school kids to the library to learn from our exhibits and our education specialists. And every year, we invite teachers to take part in our programs, whether in person or virtually, to help them hone their understanding of the LBJ years. In recent years, we've even invited students or teachers to visit with distinguished visitors, including former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, journalist Dan Rather, former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, Olympic medalist Ibtihaj Muhammad, Andrew Young, Julian Bond, and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. LBJ is often called the education president, and not without reason. The education bills that he signed into law created tremendous new opportunities for Americans to attend school at every level. Here at the LBJ Library, we try to live up to President Johnson's legacy every day. Choosing these 10 moments in the life of the LBJ Library wasn't easy. There were many others that could easily have made the list, and I suspect that many folks watching this video will also have some ideas. If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the LBJ Library has accomplished a lot in its first half century. The library has made a profound contribution to the University of Texas, to the Austin community, to Texas, to the nation, and to the wider world through its archival holdings, museum exhibits, educational initiatives, and public programs. These successes undoubtedly position us well for the next half century. But that era will also bring new challenges and opportunities. I'm committed to bringing even more people in more diverse communities through our doors to understand the history of the 1960s, which remain crucially relevant to our own day. Our museum exhibits will be state-of-the-art, and our public programs will engage the central issues of our times, even as new concerns come to the fore. We'll use emerging technologies to bring our programs and exhibits to people sitting at their own screens, even if they're far away from Austin. We'll digitize our archival holdings to enable people interested in delving deeply into the Johnson era to read the original material wherever they may be. The Johnson presidency may have ended in 1969, but it echoes powerfully across the decades. We at the LBJ Library will keep working hard to realize President Johnson's vision for an institution that welcomes everyone, that sparks insight and debate with the bark off, and serves the public in innumerable ways. Thank you so much for joining us.